Is it possible to forgive a cheater? My wife cheated on me and confessed it, and she regrets it very much. This news made me really furious. But does she have a chance that I can forgive her? Teresa woke up and stayed lying down with her eyes closed for a moment. Positioned on her left side, she began to feel increasingly uneasy. Her left eye was hidden under the pillow while she slightly opened her right eye. She glanced at a digital clock displaying 7:40. Closing her eye again, she tried to recall if there was a reason for her to get up. She sensed her husband, Scott, moving on the other side of the bed. When her consciousness cleared completely, she felt a sense of disorientation. Their watches were not next to her. They stood on the dressing table at the foot of the bed and at the other end of the bedroom. Then she remembered. It wasn't her bedroom. It was a hotel room. She was at a sales conference in Dallas. She felt Scott pressing against her back. It struck her like a piano crashing down. Oh my God, she thought. Scott is gone. Memories flooded back and she started to shake, overwhelmed by a tidal wave of regret and sorrow that swept over her, filled with shock and guilt. It all began on Friday. As she entered the room, she noticed around 30 chairs set up around a long table. About half of them were filled, with people maintaining a space between themselves and their neighbors, as is typical among strangers. The closest empty chair was positioned between a man and a woman directly in her line of sight. As she made her way across the gap, the man noticed her approach. He stood up and pulled the chair out for her, gently pushing it back as she settled into her seat. "Thank you," she replied, offering him a grateful smile. She observed that he was quite handsome, possibly a few years older than her 32. He had blonde hair and striking blue eyes that seemed almost too perfect to be real. She felt herself blush a little at his radiant smile and thoughtful gaze. She was aware of what he saw. She had noticed it in the mirror. Standing tall and slender with red hair, she had pale, nearly translucent skin, brown eyes, and freckles adorning her cute little nose. Her high cheekbones and full lips gave her a unique appearance. She had long legs and a small bust, a body type that would have suited a runway model had she ever pursued that path. "You're very welcome," he responded, extending his hand. "I'm Jason Terry." She grasped his hand, appreciating its strength as her long, slender fingers intertwined with his large, tanned ones. "Teresa Adams," she introduced herself. "Are you a buyer or a seller?" He laughed easily, and the sound was delightful to her ears. "Neither," he replied. "I'm an attorney representing the seller. How about you?" "I'm a buyer," she answered. "I work for Raylan. We're searching for some new patterns or colors that catch our eye." "Well, I'm sure you'll discover something," he said. "I know I've found something," he added with a wink. "Okay, I'm intrigued," she smiled. "What have you found?" "I'm sitting next to the most attractive woman in Dallas." He flashed her a lopsided grin that softened his words. "Really?" She laughed. "You are quite the charmer. Just what I'd expect from a lawyer. This woman is happily married and plans to remain that way." She raised her hand to show him her rings. "No harm in dreaming," he said, offering her another of those charming smiles. The meeting unfolded just as she had anticipated and extended into the late afternoon. During her downtime, she socialized and had a few chats with Jason. He invited her to dinner at the hotel, and she felt there was no harm in accepting. After going upstairs to take a shower, she called Scott. "Hey, sweetheart," he answered, sounding as cheerful as ever. "Did my girl have a good day?" "I did," she replied. "Just the usual, boring speeches, but I discovered some new summer patterns I really like. I'm about to have dinner with a lawyer I met at the first session." There was a brief silence on his end before she chuckled. "Scott, you know you're the one I love and I need to eat. This is just a business dinner, it's not a date or anything." After a moment, he laughed. Yeah, just keep that in mind. I've got to go pick Kristen up from softball practice. Have a great night. I love you. I love you too, she responded. After she finished the phone call, a smile spread across her face. She felt great thinking about their daughter and the quality time she was spending with her father. She got dressed for dinner in a pair of slacks and a lovely silk blouse. When she entered the restaurant, Jason was already waiting, and he looked at her with clear admiration. Teresa had always had a bit of a flirtatious side, and she relished the attention. She knew how to manage it and could easily deter men who got too friendly. The meal was decent, but she decided it wouldn't be a place she'd revisit. However, they had an excellent wine selection, and they enjoyed a nice bottle of Cabernet together. As they chatted over their drinks, she found him to be a delightful dinner partner. By the time he escorted her upstairs to her room, she was feeling a little tipsy. At the door, she turned around and was taken aback when he stepped closer and kissed her. The kiss intensified quickly, prompting her to take a step back and let out a nervous laugh. "Good night, Jason," she said, slipping inside and closing the door. He turned around and slowly walked back to his room. He was sure she felt it too. She was one of the most stunning women he had ever met, and she looked like a woman who had walked straight out of the pages of a fashion magazine. His wife was attractive, but this woman belonged to a completely different category. He was looking forward to these meetings, because he was always successful with women. He could usually find someone to connect with, especially away from home where they were vulnerable. He was especially attracted to married women. The risk of them becoming overly attached and ruining his seemingly perfect life was small. His job was a great opportunity that his father-in-law gave him. Jason was a junior partner in his father-in-law's firm and performed minimal duties, apart from making Janet happy. She wouldn't like it if she found out about his antics at these conventions. He had no illusions about Teresa. She was the kind of woman who was pleasant to court, but he doubted she would give up easily. He was familiar with this type of woman. However, if she did, it would undoubtedly be an unforgettable experience. Teresa leaned against the wall in her room, feeling slightly dizzy. She couldn't figure out what made her react like that, but she incredibly wanted to have fun with someone. After taking a shower, she went to bed, deciding to avoid any contact with Jason Terry the next day. However, she was here, and memories of last night began to surface. She remembered having dinner with Jason one more time. They went into the living room, had a drink, and then he asked her to dance. She knew she shouldn't do it, but for some reason she agreed. The night turned into a blur of dancing lights and soft music as she spun in his arms, and somehow they ended up in each other's arms on his bed. It all started with a slow dance. They had visited a 5-star restaurant just down the street from their hotel. The food was outstanding, the wine was abundant, and she felt a sense of freedom she hadn't experienced in a long time. After dinner, they took a brief stroll, chatting comfortably, when they passed by the entrance of a club. "Do you want to go inside?" he asked. She wanted to, but she knew it was testing the limits of what she could allow. "No, I'd love to dance, but I can't," she replied. He chuckled. "I get it. How about this? Let's head back to the hotel. I'll grab another bottle of wine. We can dance a little in my room, and then call it a night. Sound good?" A few dances wouldn't hurt, she thought. The idea of wine sounded appealing as well, so they headed back to the hotel. As they walked, she felt him reach for her hand, and she shyly accepted it. For Teresa, holding hands with this attractive man she had just met was thrilling. It felt both daring and exhilarating. He paused at the reception desk and ordered a bottle to be sent to his room. The bottle arrived about 5 minutes after they got there. He turned on a music channel on the TV, poured 2 glasses, and they toasted. "To summer fashions," he said. She threw her head back and laughed. They quickly finished the wine, and he extended his hand. He was an excellent dancer, and she matched him well. They glided effortlessly around the room, feeling the warmth of his body against hers, creating a world that felt just like the two of them. He gradually pulled her closer, fascinated by the beauty of the woman in his arms. To the sound of soft jazz, he held her tightly to him, moving in unison, while her thoughts were somewhere far away. He was a skilled seducer, and he took advantage of her protection, which began to weaken. It's time for the next step. He pressed his cheek against her ear, inhaling the scent of her fiery hair. "You smell amazing," he whispered softly. His warm breath on her ear sent shivers down her spine, and they kissed. The last outburst of resistance made her speak up. "I think I should leave," she said quietly. "Yes, it's getting late," he muttered. The last dance. She clung to him, and he continued to kiss her neck. He pulled her closer. At the same time, he turned her towards him, silencing her protests with a kiss, and whispered in her ear, "Teresa, God, you're gorgeous." She started to relax again. She was rapidly losing control of herself. He led her to the couch, kissing her. "I'm going to give you what you need," he murmured, and his deep voice sent a shiver through her body. It was the best intimacy of his life with the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. The night has turned into something fabulous. In the cold light of the morning, a heavy weight began to weigh on Teresa. She felt Jason pressing against her back. She wanted to scream, to tell him to get out and leave her alone, but a strange tiredness was sapping her strength, and she did not know what to say. She knew she didn't want to be here, but after her behavior last night, she didn't know how to stop him. For Jason, there was nothing more pleasant in the world than waking up with a married woman. This woman had been his greatest conquest, and he hadn't expected to succeed with her, but now that it had happened, he intended to enjoy every moment. He would spend the whole morning with her, then pack his things and fly back to Philadelphia with vivid memories of this incredible experience. Scott Adams has been planning this surprise for a month. It had been a long time since they went on vacation, and he wanted to surprise Teresa. He and Kristen worked on this together. They were going to fly to Dallas, surprise Teresa at her hotel, escort her to the lobby, show her that they had packed her things, and take her to Cozumel. He arranged with her company for a 10-day vacation. It was a great opportunity. They deserved a break, and that was it. She and Kristen had chosen her favorite clothes, bought her new underwear, packed everything she needed, sorted out her passports, and were now ready to leave. They knew Teresa's flight wasn't until 5, so they arrived at the hotel in Dallas at 10 a.m. At the front desk, they inquired about Teresa's room. After Scott showed his ID, he was given a key card, and they left their luggage in the lobby, sharing giggles like co-conspirators as they rode the elevator to the 6th floor. Kristen could barely hold back her laughter, imagining the surprise on her mother's face. At 10 years old, she was a miniature version of her mother, with the same fiery red hair but Scott's complexion, her golden tan contrasting with her hair and striking green eyes. She swiped the card, and when the light on the lock turned green, they quietly opened the door and burst in. The room was empty. It was clear that no one had slept in the bed. 2 mints sat on the pillow. Teresa's belongings were in the room, but there was no sign of her. For a moment they were confused. Then Kristen suggested maybe she had gone to breakfast and the maid had already made the bed. They headed down to the lobby and were waiting by the elevator when a door opened down the hallway. Teresa stepped out, glanced in both directions, and saw only 2 people by the elevator. She was holding her shoes in one hand and her jacket draped over her other arm. Walking towards her room, all she could think about was the shower she desperately needed for her aching body, until her world suddenly shattered. "Mom?" The voice of a 10-year-old carried a tone of dread. "Mom? What?" "We were looking—" She looked up and recognized the two figures by the elevator. Her husband and daughter. It couldn't be. Her mind raced for an explanation. How could they be here? Frozen in shock, she stood there, thoughts spinning wildly, unable to move or speak. They stared back at her disheveled appearance, as stunned as she was. "What?" she managed to say. What are you doing here?" "It was supposed to be a surprise," Kristen said. "We came to take you on vacation. We've been planning this for a month, Mom. What were you doing in that room?" I drank too much," she stammered. "I fell asleep." She could feel her life falling apart in front of her. "Whose room is that?" Scott asked, his voice dangerously calm. It's... She couldn't finish. "Let me guess," he said, his voice thick with anger and hurt. "The lawyer?" She couldn't meet his gaze or say anything. She nodded, as bitter tears began streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry," she managed to choke out. The elevator chimed and the doors slid open. "Goodbye, Teresa," Scott said as they stepped into the elevator. She screamed and darted towards the door, but it was already closing as she tried to get in. She watched the floor numbers light up as the elevator began its descent, and let out a cry of anguish and fury, collapsing in the hallway, sobbing uncontrollably. A few doors opened, and curious faces peeked out. One of them was Jason Terry. He saw Teresa slumped against the wall and rushed over to help. He tried to lift her to her feet, but she was limp until she looked up at him with a haunted expression. Recognition flickered, and she spat like a wildcat, her nails slashing at his face, clawing for his eyes. Jason fled, his face bleeding, and felt one of her shoes hit him between the shoulder blades. He stumbled, but she was on him again, clawing at the back of his neck. Panicked, he shoved her away and scrambled to the safety of the stairwell. He slammed the door behind him, and she pounded on it briefly before turning and walking off. Peeking out into the hallway, he saw her stop to pick up her shoes and enter her room. Blood dripping from his face, Jason made his way to the front desk and requested a replacement keycard. He refused all offers of help as well as their suggestion to call the police. The last thing he needed was for this situation to get out. He already had enough to worry about explaining his injuries to Janet. As the elevator doors slid shut, Scott and Kristen could still hear Teresa's final scream. Trembling, Kristen clung to her father. "Dad, what just happened? Why was Mom acting that way? And what did you mean when you said it was the lawyer's room?" Scott held his daughter close. "Sweetheart, I'm so sorry," he said softly. "Do you know what it means to cheat?" She looked up at him with her piercing green eyes. "Isn't that when a husband or wife sleeps with someone else? Is that what Mom was doing?" "Yes," he replied gently. "That's what it means, and that's what your mother did. I'm so sorry, honey, but I have to be honest with you." She sniffled, a small tear beginning to roll down her cheek. "Thanks, Dad. I wouldn't like it if you lied to me. I hate all of this. But if you lied, it would make things even worse if that's possible. I know I'm not very old, but I'm too old to be lied to." He hugged her tighter. "Yes, you are." "What are we going to do?" she asked. "We're going on vacation," he replied. "Without Mom?" she asked. "Do you want her to come?" he questioned. She paused to think. "No, I don't. Right now, I don't think I ever want to see her again." "I hope you change your mind," he said. "We're going to have to see her again, Kristen. We live with her." "What if you get a divorce?" she asked. "I honestly don't know," he said. "With how divorce works in this country, some judge could end up giving her custody of you." "Dad, I'm counting on you not to let that happen," she said. "Don't let her take me. I want to stay with you." "I might not have a choice." "What would you want me to do?" he asked. "If I refuse, the police could take you away and throw me in jail." "What if we don't go back?" she suggested. "What if we just run away?" "Honey, "I don't know if that would work," he said. When the elevator reached the lobby, they gathered their luggage, leaving Teresa's bag with the front desk, and hailed a cab to the airport. During the ride, they chatted and tried to think of activities they could enjoy. "I need to work," he clarified. "I have to earn money so we can have a decent life, and I have a good job." "Couldn't you find a job elsewhere?" she inquired. "Sure, but I wouldn't make nearly as much as I do now," he replied. "Your grandparents, my parents, live at home. They haven't done anything wrong, and it wouldn't be fair to take you away to a place where they couldn't see you. They love you, sweetheart, and even if you don't want to hear it, your mother loves you too." I can't imagine what she thought she was doing, but I'm sure she cares about you. "Well, I guess I love her," she responded, tears streaming down her face again. "But I'm really angry with her. This kind of anger doesn't go away with an 'I'm sorry.'" Scott held his trembling daughter close, wrapping her in his arms. "I understand, sweetheart." He kissed the top of her head. "Me too." Despite everything, they managed to enjoy their vacation, and if anything, it brought them even closer together, their shared sorrow forging a stronger bond. The underlying tension was always present, and they discussed their plans repeatedly until their flight home. Teresa was in a fragile state, far from her usual self. She struggled to eat or sleep, only finding rest when exhaustion overwhelmed her, often dozing off wherever she happened to be. Most of her sleep occurred in Scott's recliner or on the couch, where she would cry herself to sleep, only to awaken sobbing uncontrollably until she collapsed again. Being on vacation spared her from the obligation of going to work. Sometimes she thought a distraction would be welcome, but she knew she wouldn't be able to focus. After 4 days of silence from anyone, her mother called her cell phone. Teresa was reluctant to talk to her, but feeling the need to connect with someone, she picked up the call. The story poured out of her in heaving sobs, nearly incomprehensible to her heartbroken mother. "Stop, Teresa, please stop," Sarah urged. "Let me call your father and I'll be there right away. Don't do anything, just sit down, make us a drink, and I'll be on my way, okay?" "Yes, Mom, okay, I'll be waiting." "Please hurry," she pleaded. Sarah contacted her husband, Mark, informing him that Teresa was in a state and had made a serious mistake, so she was going to help her through it. Upon arriving, she walked in and was instantly met by her daughter, who rushed across the room and collapsed into her mother's arms, crying uncontrollably. Sarah held her tightly for a long time, gently stroking her hair and assuring Teresa that she loved her, and everything would turn out fine. She wished she felt that assured herself. In reality, she had no clue, but sensed that Teresa needed the reassurance. Eventually, Teresa calmed down enough to speak clearly, and they settled onto the couch, propping their feet up on the ottoman while sipping the good scotch that Teresa had poured. The entire scandalous story spilled out, leaving Sarah horrified. The infidelity was already bad enough, but the situation that had unfolded was almost unbelievable. She couldn't fathom a worse outcome and struggled to see how her daughter's marriage could survive. "Oh my God, Tess," she said. "You're in a real mess. I can't imagine how Scott and Kristen must feel. How could you—" Her daughter's anguished cry interrupted her, leading to another wave of uncontrollable sobbing. "I'm sorry, sweetheart, I didn't mean to come down on you like that. You clearly feel terrible as it is. I was just thinking out loud. Where are Scott and Kristen now?" "I don't know," Teresa replied. "They mentioned something about taking me on a vacation. I guess they left without me." The thought made her weep again. "Did they say how long they'd be gone?" Sarah inquired. Teresa shook her head. "No, but they arranged for me to have 10 days off work. I suppose that's when they'll return. I could call Scott's office to find out when he's expected back." She did just that and learned that he had also taken 10 days off. "I can't stay here alone for 10 days," she told Sarah. Can I come stay with you and Dad, Mom? I can't be by myself for that long." Her voice rose in panic, and Sarah quickly agreed to let her stay. "Teresa, I'm not sure what to expect from your father," she warned. "It's very likely he'll be really angry with you. He loves you deeply, but he'll be incredibly disappointed. You should be prepared for a serious talk. He'll forgive you, but you know how he feels about Scott." "My God, Teresa, I can't even imagine how Kristen—" She didn't finish her thought, noticing the hurt in her daughter's eyes. "Let's go pack you some clothes," she suggested. Teresa was not in a condition to drive, so she rode with her mother, gazing sadly out the window and reflecting on the wreckage of her life. She couldn't come up with a reasonable explanation for her actions, even to herself. Just a week ago, she would have never believed she could end up in such a situation. She had felt secure, happy in her marriage and family, thriving in her job, in love with her husband, and desperately loving Kristen. Now her life was in ruins, and she had no idea how it had come to this. As her mind turned inward, she felt no decrease in her love for Scott. He was, and would always be, her entire world. Their intimate life was wonderful, and she had never considered being unfaithful until that weekend. She appreciated the attention of other men, but it was merely flirting, something she had always engaged in, and she never intended for it to escalate into anything more. She concluded that there must be some character flaw within her, unknown even to herself, that had led to this situation. It would require deep self-reflection to uncover and explain it when Scott and Kristen returned. She felt a sense of urgency building within her, accompanied by rising panic. Her father's reaction was what she had anticipated, and she was firmly in his disfavor. She knew he would be angry for a while, but eventually he would forgive her. She wished she had the same certainty regarding Scott. During the 10-day reprieve she had, she took some steps forward. She sought out a counselor and attended 2 emergency sessions. She received a prescription for antidepressants, which offered some relief. However, she still didn't feel prepared when the 10th day arrived. Sarah drove her home, and she anxiously awaited the return of her husband and daughter. When she heard the garage door open, she jumped up and hurried to the laundry room door to look into the garage. She saw Kristen getting out of the car and rushed around to meet her. As Kristen spotted her, she raised her hand. "Save it, Mom," she said. "I don't want you to touch me." Teresa felt her knees give way, and her pleading gaze softened Kristen's defenses just a bit. "Please, baby, I need to hold you," Teresa implored. Kristen nodded curtly, and Teresa quickly closed the gap, enveloping her daughter's slender form in a tight embrace, hot tears cascading onto Kristen's hair. Scott stepped out of the car and opened the trunk. He took out their luggage and brought it inside while Teresa clung to Kristen as if she were a lifeline. He carried the bags upstairs, placing his own in his room before delivering Kristen's to hers. When he returned downstairs, he found Teresa and Kristen sitting on the couch, sharing a soft drink. He noticed a can and a glass with ice on the coffee table in front of his recliner. With a sigh, he sat down and glanced at his wife, who seemed unable to meet his gaze. Desperate to gather her thoughts, Teresa started, "Scott, Kristen, I need to apologize to both of you. I can't express enough how deeply I regret my actions and how ashamed I feel. I have no justifications for what I've done. If you give me the chance, I'll show you how much I regret it." "Kristen, I'd like to speak with you alone first, and then I'd like to talk to you, Scott. Will you allow me to do that?" "You want me to leave?" Scott questioned. "No, not at all. I hope Kristen will take me to her room so we can talk," Teresa replied. "Okay, let's go," Kristen said. They headed up the stairs, and Scott watched them go, his mind in turmoil. Once they reached Kristen's room, the door closed, leaving him only able to hear soft murmurs from inside. Teresa sat Kristen on her bed, kneeling in front of her and taking both of her daughter's hands. "Sweetheart, I know I really messed up here," she said. "No, that makes it sound like an accident. I jumped. I know I did. Honey, have I been a good mother to you? You're 10 years old. Do you think I've been a good mother for these 10 years? Kristen sat quietly for a moment, contemplating her response. "Yes, Mom, you've always been a good mother," she replied. "I think you were the best mother you could be for 10 years until you weren't." Her words struck Teresa like a heavy blow, causing a ringing in her ears and making her feel faint. She shook her head, gathered her emotions, and tried again. "I know, Kristen. I understand what I did. I took something pure and beautiful and tarnished it. I'm sorry. I don't know how to erase that. All I can do now is promise that I'll never do anything to make you ashamed of me again. Do you think you'll ever forgive me, sweetheart?" Kristen paused for another moment before answering. "It depends," she finally said. "What do you mean?" Teresa asked. "It depends on what happens," Kristen explained. "It depends on what you do. I want to forgive you, Mom. I probably will. But I'm going to be really mad at you for a long time. Damn it, Mom. I'm so angry with you right now." Teresa gasped. "Kristen, you shouldn't use language like that." "Well, a lot of people do things they shouldn't," Kristen pointed out. "You, for instance. You shouldn't have been in that man's room, should you? You have no right to tell me what I should or shouldn't do." Teresa cried softly for a moment. "Yes, I understand, sweetheart. I know I don't have the right to tell you anything, but I do love you, and it's my responsibility to guide you in the right direction, regardless of how badly I've messed things up. No matter how much I've lost sight of who I should be, you still need to be the kind of girl your father can be proud of. Do you get that?" "Yes, I do," Kristen replied. "Then explain what you mean by, 'It depends on what I do,'" Teresa asked. "If Dad divorces you and our family falls apart, I won't forgive you for that." Kristen started to tear up. "You need to do everything in your power to prevent that from happening. The second thing is, if Dad divorces you, you'll have to make some choices. If that happens, I want to live with him. I don't trust you enough to want to stay with you. If you complicate things for us, I won't forgive you for that either." For the first time, the full weight of her actions hit Teresa like a freight train. The consequences of her foolishness were right there on the bed before her and downstairs in the living room. She was at a loss for words, unsure of what to do or even think. She knew she had to take action. "I understand," she said. "You can count on this, Kristen. If there's any way for me to stay with your father, I swear I'll make it work. If he decides he can't stand me anymore, I'll accept that too, and I will never, ever try to take you away from him. If that happens, I can only hope you'll still have some love left for me, because if you hate me, I don't know how I can handle that." "I don't hate you, Mom," Kristen said, looking down at her mother, who appeared so defeated with her head lowered, hands on Kristen's, and shoulders slumped. "I thought I would, but I don't. I don't like you much right now, and you need to change some things. You have to go down there and fight. You need to put forth your best effort for Dad, for me, for our family. Go down there, Mom, and do what's necessary. Don't just sit there like a doormat. You need to get back to being the mother you were last week. Look Dad in the eye and fight. Will you do that?" Teresa stood up, pulling her daughter to her feet and embracing her tightly. "Yes, my love, I will. Thank you, Kristen. You're the smartest, most beautiful daughter a mother could ever ask for. I'm so sorry I forgot that. I remember now, and I'm going to fight." She turned and left, glancing back and pausing for a moment. Kristen gestured her away, and Teresa smiled as she prepared to confront what lay ahead. Scott was waiting, having replaced his soft drink with something stronger from the decanter on the table. Teresa poured herself a small amount and settled on the floor in front of him, her legs crossed and her drink cradled between them, almost like a shield. "Scott, I know that saying I'm sorry won't change anything, but I truly am," she began. "I've never felt so disappointed in myself. I realize that while I feel terrible, you must feel even worse. If I could take that burden from you, I would. What are we going to do? Are you finished with me? Is there anything I can do?" "I'm not sure," he replied. "I've had 10 days to think about it. I have some questions for you, but I don't know if I'll trust your answers. This could all be a painful waste of time. What do you think?" "Ask me anything," she said. "I promise to be completely honest. I know you have no reason to trust me, but just look at my face, and I believe you'll see that I'm being truthful." He took a deep breath. "All right, here goes. Do you still love me, Tess? Are you in love with me?" "I never stopped loving you," she replied. "I love you even more than I did on our wedding day. You're everything I envisioned when I said I would marry you. I am completely and utterly in love with you. I always have been, and I always will be." He studied her face as she spoke and saw no signs of doubt or deception. "Well, how many men do you have? Was it?" "3," she replied. He looked surprised. "3? Oh my God, Teresa. Is this not your first time?" No, she quickly assured him. "This is the first time with you. You know, I was with my boyfriend in college. You were the second, and then a lawyer." He leaned back in his chair, feeling a little drained. Her initial response had awakened some emotions in him, but after her explanation, he felt weak. "Look at me and promise," he said. She looked him straight in the eye. "Since we've been together, I've never slept with anyone until that Saturday," she said. "I have never kissed another man, and I have never allowed anyone to touch me. I just wish I could still say it." "Are you in love with this lawyer?" he asked. "God, no, Scott." "I barely know him," she replied. "I will never see him again, and I regret sitting next to him. I love you, Scott, and no one else. I can't explain what happened in Dallas. I had 2 sessions with a psychologist who helped me figure everything out. I'm trying to figure out what's wrong with me because I did this to you, to Christian, to myself. I'm really trying, Scott." He gazed at her gloomily for a moment. "What am I going to do with you, Tess?" The despair in his voice was evident. "I don't know," she whispered. "Love me. Help me, Scott. I'm a wreck, I realize that, but I love you, and I need you now more than ever." "I know that sounds foolish considering what I've done, but it's true. I'll accept any punishment you choose to impose. I'll do anything you ask. Just tell me what you want, and I'll comply without a single complaint." "What if I say I'm going to be with another woman?" he questioned. She inhaled sharply. "Yes, I expected that." "Do what you need to do, Scott. Just forgive me, please. I won't say a word if that's necessary for you. I deserve whatever you choose. I hope you won't lower yourself to my level. You're a better person than I am. Please don't diminish yourself because of me. It would make me hate myself even more for pushing you there." "I think I should file for divorce," he replied. "Yes, I agree," she responded. "You should, but I'm hoping you won't. If you decide to go through with it, please don't take Kristen away from me, Scott. Allow me to see her whenever I can, all right? I know if that happens, she'll want to be with you. I won't contest that, but I need her. If I lose you, I can't lose her too. I can't bear that." Her composure faltered, and a sob escaped as the weight of her misery and guilt consumed her. Scott was deeply affected by the clear brokenness in the woman he had loved for his entire adult life. "I won't do that," he said. "I don't know what I'm going to do, but I won't do that." "Thank you," she whispered, almost like a prayer. "What do you want to do now, Scott? I mean, today?" "Rest," he replied. I want to rest so damn badly, but that's not likely. Why? Teresa asked. Go lie down, take a nap, relax on the couch. That sounds good, Scott said. But every time I'm not doing something to keep my mind busy, all I can think about is this whole damn nightmare. His voice rose, and for the first time she heard the anger in it. I can't sleep, and the only time I can eat is when Kristen distracts me from it. Same here, she said softly. I've been too sad and miserable to do anything. Maybe if we put on the TV and just closed our eyes, we could finally get some rest. They gave it a try. Scott reclining in his chair and Teresa curled up on the sofa. To their surprise, both worn out, slept for a solid 4 hours. Scott was woken by Kristen gently stroking his forehead. I'm sorry, Dad, she said. I'm hungry and there's nothing to eat. The milk's gone bad, so I couldn't have cereal. I don't think Mom's cooked or eaten in days. The bread is moldy, so I couldn't make a sandwich. Teresa stirred awake when she heard their quiet voices. What's going on? She asked. Once she realized the situation, she sat up, a bit groggy from her nap. I'm sorry, sweetheart, she said. I haven't been staying here, and I didn't have the energy to do anything. I've been with your grandparents. How about I order us a pizza? Kristen liked that idea. Scott groaned as he got up and headed to the grocery store for bread, milk, eggs, and snacks. When he returned, the pizza delivery guy was just pulling up, so Scott took the pizza, paid him, and brought everything inside. They sat around the small kitchen table, not saying much. The silence was awkward until Kristen finally spoke up. Okay, this is just weird. Is this how it's going to be now? If it is, can I just stay with Grandma? Scott chuckled. Sorry, honey. No, you can't stay with Grandma, and yes, there will be some awkward silences. Why? Teresa asked. We can talk about whatever we want. Life didn't end just because I made a horrible mistake. We all still have lives. Scott, we both have to go back to work the day after tomorrow. Do you think you'll be okay? No, but I'll get through it, he replied. Do you think it'll be easy for you? No, it's going to be hard, she admitted. The hardest part will be being apart from you. I won't know what you're thinking, and that terrifies me. When I can see you, I feel like somehow you're not talking to a lawyer and planning a divorce. Kristen's head snapped up. Dad, are you... No, sweetheart, I haven't made any decisions yet, he reassured her. You'll be the first to know, I promise. I'm fine with being second, she said. I think Mom should be the first to know. You're right, he agreed. I meant I'd tell you both right away. Is there anything I can do to help you make that decision? Teresa asked. Get yourself tested for STDs, he replied. Kristen looked up again. Don't ask, Teresa said, grimacing. All right, I'll go ahead with it. I doubt there's an issue. He's married, Scott. I don't think his wife would be too happy if he brought anything home, so he's probably safe. I'll take care of it in the morning. Scott grunted but didn't respond. Does it make a difference? Teresa asked. Is what I did worse if I have an STD or better if I don't? No, I was just thinking about you, Scott replied. Now that you mention it, though, there is something I think you should do. I'll do anything, Teresa said, eager to please him, but his next words crushed her. I think you should find that lawyer guy's wife and tell her about what he's done. What? She gasped. Why, Scott? What would that accomplish? Why would you even want that? I'd want to know, Scott said. If the roles were reversed, I'd want to know what my spouse was up to at these conventions. Do you really think you're the first, Tess? Or the last? She hadn't considered that and didn't particularly want to. How could I even do that? She asked. You're good with computers, he said. Do you know his name and where he lives? Yes, but... Then find him and call his wife, Scott insisted. I want to hear how that conversation goes. Teresa lowered her head and closed her eyes. The shame of making that call was already unbearable, and she hadn't even done it yet. Tears began to fall from her eyes. "Okay, if that's what you want, I'll do it tomorrow," she said miserably. Kristen wasn't happy at all with how the conversation was going. "All right, well, that was as bad as anything I've ever heard," she said. "Can we talk about something else, please? I have an idea. Why don't we discuss how we're going to fix this? Have you thought about counseling, Dad?" "Yes, I have," Scott responded. "Are you open to that, Tess?" "Yes, I am," she replied eagerly. "Do you want to help me choose someone, or would you prefer one of us to handle it?" "I suppose I could take care of that," he said. "Neither of us knows any marriage counselors, so one is probably as good as the next. I'll work on that tomorrow." Kristen smiled brightly. "See, that was good. I'm heading to my room now. Keep thinking like this. Thanks for the pizza." She left with a spring in her step, and the awkward silence settled again. Teresa shifted uncomfortably before suggesting they move to the living room. Scott trailed after her, lost in thought. She took his arm and pulled him down beside her on the couch. Though hesitant to be that close to her, he let himself be persuaded. "Scott, do you believe I love you?" she asked softly. He looked down at her tear-streaked face, her eyes red from crying and exhaustion. "Yes, I think I do," he answered. "You wouldn't be here if you didn't. I don't believe you love me as much as I thought, or as much as I love you. But yes, I know you love me." His words struck her like a cold blade. "You're mistaken," she replied. "I love you as deeply as one person can love another. I don't understand what happened to me or why I acted the way I did. I'm going to try to figure it out. Do you think I'll ever betray you again?" He looked down at her, noticing the pain in her large brown eyes. "No, I don't," he answered. "That doesn't mean much, though, because I never thought you would in the first place. I believe you've seen the consequences of such actions, and I don't think you want to experience that again. I'm not entirely fond of the selfishness behind that reasoning, but you understand how high the price would be." She felt unsettled by his words, picturing herself in his situation. "You're right about not wanting to endure it again, but I never viewed it that way, Scott. The worst part isn't that for me. The hardest part is the shame I feel and how dirty I am. It hurts to realize I'm the kind of person capable of doing something like that." She looked at him, hoping for his understanding. He nodded. "I can see that. Then I realize the damage I've caused you, how deeply I've hurt you, and I constantly think about your feelings. I reflect on Kristen and all the pain I've inflicted on her. If anything, that's the hardest part. God, Scott, our baby." She had to pause for a moment. I nearly couldn't face her. I felt so ashamed and so dirty. But I can't live without her, so I had to confront her. I'm not sure I can live without you. I'm almost certain I can't manage without both you and her. "Well, you're feeling a bit of my dilemma," he said. "I'm trying to figure out if I can live without you. Honestly, Tess, I wish I could. That would be the simplest path, just to move on. Thankfully, I don't have to worry about Kristen." She took a deep, trembling breath. "No, you don't," she conceded. "I realize it would be easy to just discard me." "No, you don't know that because it's not true," he insisted. "Damn it, Tess, we've been together since we were 17. How could you possibly think that?" "I'm sorry," she replied. "I didn't mean it that way. I should have said that's likely what you would want to do. I'm hoping you don't, but I know it could happen. Scott, I'm drained. I can't think straight, I can't focus, and I'm probably going to say the wrong things. Can we talk tomorrow? Let's just go to bed, okay? Will you hold me and maybe we can get some sleep?" They went to bed, and Teresa fell asleep instantly in his arms. For Scott, it was more difficult. He felt a slight revulsion at touching her, which made him wonder if he could ever see her the same way again. Eventually he fell asleep, overtaken by exhaustion, but his sleep was restless and filled with troubled dreams. The next morning they both slept until almost 10 o'clock, with Scott waking up first. After taking a shower, he made breakfast. Kristen came downstairs looking fresh and charming. They enjoyed their meal together, listening to Teresa take a shower. A few minutes later, she came out looking much better than the night before. Since it was Sunday, they attended Kristen's softball game, which her team won. After that, they celebrated with ice cream. Kristen went home with a teammate to spend the afternoon, while her parents had a hard time getting home. Once inside, they began to discuss and make plans. "You know that at some point I'm going to want to hear about everything that happened, right?" Scott asked. Teresa shuddered at the thought. "I don't want to share," she replied. "I don't want to hurt you anymore." "Well, I don't want to feel offended anymore either," he said. "I think I need to know. It will affect what I decide to do. What did you do with him? Will you ever be satisfied with me again?" As she listened to his questions, a feeling of horror grew in her at the realization that it would be incredibly difficult to answer some of them. Should she lie? Or would that be another betrayal? She felt lost and didn't know what to do. "Scott, do you really need all that information?" she asked. "I'm telling you that you are the only one I love. I've never loved anyone else, and never will. You fulfill me completely, and no one has ever made me feel as loved, satisfied, and safe as you do. I did something terrible. It's awful to me, and if you really want to know, I'll tell you. But I don't want to inflict any more pain on you. Do you understand?" "I do, but I need to know why you did it," he replied. "Because I'm a fool," she exclaimed. "There's no reason, Scott. I was foolish, selfish, and thoughtless. That's the only reason there is. What other reason could there be? I never thought I could sleep with someone I didn't love. I didn't know it was even possible. But I just lost control, became someone cruel and horrible, and I'm truly sorry. I'll carry the regret of that one awful night for the rest of my life. It's something I look back on with horror, not enjoyment. There are no fond memories, just self-loathing for myself and that jerk. I never want to think about it again, but I have to so that I can ensure it doesn't happen again." Teresa headed to their home office to try and locate Jason Terry. It took her about 20 minutes and $60 to obtain his home address and phone number. She paused for a moment, dreading what lay ahead, before going to find Scott. "I'm ready to make that call," she told him. He followed her back into the office as she dialed the number, putting the phone on speaker. When Jason answered, Scott quickly hushed Teresa and requested to speak with Mrs. Janet Terry. After a moment, she picked up, and Scott whispered, "You're on." The conversation turned out to be one of the most painful and humiliating experiences of Teresa's life. The weeping and furious woman on the other end initially refused to believe her, then unleashed her anger, but eventually accepted the truth once the details were disclosed. After some time, Janet hung up, leaving Teresa shaken and trembling. "Why, Scott?" she asked. "Was that just to punish me?" "Partly to make you confront the consequences of your actions," he replied. "It wasn't just Kristen and me that you hurt. It was that woman and her children, if she has any." "Scott, I need to know if there's any hope for me," she said. "If there's no hope for us, I can't go on like this. It's too painful and too hard if you plan to just throw me away and move on." "I haven't made that decision yet, so there's still hope," he reassured her. "I love you, Tess. You know that. I'm incredibly angry and hurt by what you did. But it's not like I can just flip a switch and stop loving the girl I've been with since we were teenagers. We started dating in high school, and breaking up isn't like ending a relationship with someone you just met. Jesus, Tess. We have an amazing daughter together." "Yes, I know," she said softly, her head bowed as tears streamed down her face. How many tears do I have left? She wondered. How many more will I shed? Jason Terry was just beginning to feel the weight of his tears. By the end of the day, he found himself in a motel. Janet had consulted a lawyer, and he was out of work. Discrepancies in his billable hours suggested he might face fraud charges and was almost certain to be disbarred. Teresa scheduled an appointment with a marriage counselor for Monday, and that Friday they attended the session. The counselor, Nancy Kincaid, was there for 3 sessions. During the 3rd session, as they discussed Scott's feelings of anger and betrayal, she made the error of telling him that few marriages survive without infidelity, often involving both partners, implying his expectations of fidelity were unrealistic. He stood up and approached her desk. "Thank you for your time," he said. "Your services are no longer needed." He then turned to Teresa and asked, "Are you coming?" Ms. Kincaid attempted to intervene, but they left without saying another word. Outside on the sidewalk, Teresa burst into laughter. Scott looked at her as if she had lost her mind. "What's so funny?" he asked. "The expression on her face," she gasped. "Your services are no longer needed." "Oh my God, Scott, you completely stunned her." He chuckled. "Well, she was a jerk," he replied. "Who's next?" Teresa had also been seeing a psychologist on her own. After many sessions, he suggested they have a meeting that included Scott. It proved to be very enlightening for both of them. Dr. Roberts introduced himself to Scott and began the session. "I'm going to talk for a bit," he said. "After that, you two can ask any questions or share any comments you have. Teresa and I have addressed some issues that I wanted to discuss with you, Mr. Adams. Please, just call me Scott." "Thank you, Scott. We have really delved into the root of what happened to Teresa in Dallas and reached an understanding of what led to her downfall. First, I want to say that your wife is the most beautiful patient I've ever had," Roberts stated. Scott was unsure of where that was leading and felt quite uneasy about the remark. "Well, she is indeed very beautiful," he replied. "That's where the issue began," Roberts continued. "Teresa mentioned that you participate in weightlifting competitions, Scott. How do you feel when you walk into an average gym?" "I don't quite understand," Scott said. "Feel about what?" "How do you feel about the people who are lifting weights?" "Well, I assess how much they have on the bar," Scott responded. "I just gauge their strength." "Do you consider yourself stronger than most of them?" Roberts inquired. "Yes, but I've been lifting since I was a kid," Scott explained. "I see. Do you think that people who aren't as strong as you pose a threat to you?" "No, I wouldn't say so," Scott replied. "Now imagine you're the smartest person in the room at a science fair," Roberts said. "How would that make you feel?" "Probably the same way," Scott answered. "Now picture yourself as a woman, the most stunning one that most men have ever encountered. You enter a room full of men or women. Consider how that would make you feel. This sensation surpasses even that of feeling strong or intelligent. Would you feel in command of the situation?" "I suppose I would," Scott replied. "Attractive women draw a lot of attention, and you can often sense that they realize they're in charge." "I think that's what happened with Teresa," Roberts said. "She was both naive and vain. She had never been in a scenario where she didn't feel in control. She has always been the most beautiful person in the room." Scott glanced at his wife, noticing her eyes glistening with tears of humiliation. "I can understand how she would feel that way," he said. "Now imagine you've stepped into a gym and there's an Olympic weightlifter present. Picture yourself at a science center when Albert Einstein walks in and sits next to you. You have a presentation to deliver. You're on the bench press. How does that make you feel?" "I guess I'd feel quite out of my depth," Scott admitted. "That's what happened with Teresa," Roberts said. "She encountered someone who had more control than she did. This man was highly skilled, representing individuals Teresa admired, and he was beyond what she was ready to deal with." "What will happen the next time?" Scott asked. "There won't be a next time," Roberts responded. "We have plans in place, and she'll never be caught off guard again. She understands now that she's not invincible, and she's prepared. She has experienced the pain, knows the cost, recognizes her flaws, and is taking steps to improve them." The meeting lasted an hour, and Scott left feeling more optimistic than he had in a long while. The second marriage counselor they visited turned out to be very religious, quoting the Bible during their 2 sessions. The third was a free-love hippie type who tried to convince them to try swinging, assuring them that the lifestyle would be just what they needed. Standing outside yet another office, they shared a laugh. "Jesus, Tess," Scott said, "these people are even more messed up than we are. This is ridiculous. We might as well talk to Mrs. Baker across the street." "You know, I think you're right, but what are we going to do?" she replied. "I guess we'll have to figure it out ourselves," he said. "I have an idea," she responded. "Well, it can't be worse than the nonsense we've been hearing," he said. "What is it?" "I think I should move back in with Mom and Dad," she suggested. He started to object, but she raised her hand. "Remember how we fell in love the first time, Scott? We had math class together. I helped you with your math, and you helped me with chemistry. We went on dates, and I discovered what a gem you were. You fell for me, and the rest is history. Let's enroll in 2 classes together at the university. I'll help you, you'll help me. We'll go out on dates and see where it leads. If it works out, great. If not, then I'll know I ruined any chance for us. We're not having intimacy anyway, so it'll be no different from when we first met." "It might be a bit tricky to explain this to Kristen," he cautioned. "Let me tell her," Teresa pleaded. "I need to show her that I'm putting in the effort. She told me to fight for you, and I don't know what else I can do. Please let me explain to her how I'm fighting." Kristen was very pleased with her mother, and for the next 3 months they did exactly that. Teresa came 3 times a week, and they studied together in class, talked about school, about their work, about everything they did separately, and gradually they felt that the spark that had been extinguished due to Teresa's betrayal was beginning to flare up brighter. They signed up for additional classes, and 6 months later they became close for the first time. It was as magical as they both remembered. Teresa did everything in her power to assure him of her love and devotion, even quarreled with her parents in front of Scott and Kristen when they dared to criticize him for being so slow to recover. After 18 months, Scott asked her to return to them, and they continued to strengthen their previous positions. Her first convention was stressful, but when she surprised them by giving them plane tickets and a week-long vacation in Las Vegas, that tension disappeared. She went to the second Congress alone, but during the day she called him twice, every day, and in the evening they talked for an hour on the internet via video conference. Trust was restored, and 5 years later, a weekend in Dallas turned into a fading memory. When Teresa returned from her second trip this year, she walked in and found Scott alone watching a football game. He looked up when she came in, turned off the sound, and she settled into his lap. "Did my girl get there well?" he asked. "No, I didn't do that," she replied. It felt like it had been going on forever. "Why was it so hard?" he asked. "I missed you every minute," she said. "I missed Kristen, our house, everything we had in common. We're still fine, aren't we, Scott?" He sighed as he touched her. "We're all good now," he said.